The 2021 draft class is nearly 2 full seasons into their careers, and some players have had phenomenal starts to their careers like Micah Parsons and Jamar Chase. This class is remembered for both having superstars seemingly everywhere and for having 5 quarterbacks selected in the first round, and more specifically, 5 in the first 15 picks. The draft started with 3 straight quarterbacks, those of course being Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance. Justin Fields and Mac Jones were selected later in the first round, but given these quarterbacks were all first-round picks, they are naturally going to be compared, not just for a year or two while they try and figure it out, but for the course of their career. There's going to be times where hindsight is 20/20 and people ask, what did this team see in this player, or why did he go above that player? And we are starting to see it, and we are less than 2 years removed from the 2021 NFL Draft. And in today's video, we are going to be redrafting the 5 quarterbacks from this class in reverse order. And without further ado, let's begin. The 5th quarterback that would be selected in this redraft would be Zach Wilson. For all of the success the Jets have had and for everything they've done right over the past 2 years, Zach Wilson has not been one of them. They are currently a 7-5 team with their most recent loss to the Minnesota Vikings, and Zach Wilson was a healthy scratch in this game. Wilson was 5-2 as a starter in 2022, and unfortunately for him, the 2 losses were ugly, and they were games the Jets should have won. And what makes the Wilson pick look worse is how much the Jets players are rallying around quarterback Mike White and supporting him, and things you would love to see them do with the player they selected with the number 2 overall draft pick, not Mike White. And that's no disrespect to Mike as much as it is a bad look on the franchise for selecting Wilson where they did. When you think of an NFL draft bust, you think of a player that has poor performance on the field, which Wilson has as lifetime he has completed just 55.6% of his passes and has a negative touchdown to interception ratio of 13-16. You also think of a poor attitude and an arrogance for a player that has not done much at the NFL level, which ironically Wilson also has. It's been a few weeks since the infamous Patriots game in which they lost 10-3 on a walk-off punt return touchdown, but for as much of a lob question Zach was asked, which was if he let the defense down or not in a game they allowed 3 points, to answer no was in a lot of ways the end to Zach Wilson's second season. He hasn't played in the 2 games since, and the Mike White-led Jets have put up 53 points in 2 games compared to the previous 4 games in which Wilson was the starter, where the Jets put up 56 points. That's an average of 14 points versus an average of 26.5 in 2 games. The reason for Zach Wilson being the 5th quarterback selected, even behind Trey Lance, is we know Zach has been a disappointing player through 2 seasons. And if I were a general manager making the choice between Wilson and Lance at this point in time, I would rather roll the dice on Trey Lance than potentially disrupt the locker room and lower team morale by bringing in Zach Wilson. Can he bounce back is an entirely different question, but less than 2 years in, Wilson has all the makings of a draft bust. And as mentioned during the Wilson segment, the 4th quarterback in a redraft would be Trey Lance of the San Francisco 49ers. Having him above Zach Wilson may be controversial, but my reasoning for it more or less comes down to this. Do not play horrible and be bottom 2 or 3 in every passing category next year, and this solidifies him having him number 4. Just do not do that, and you're going to be alright. Lance, of course, could prove to be a disappointing pick, but the situation he has is one of the best in all of football. He has weapons everywhere, and even for Wilson, he has a considerable amount of help in New York, which is another reason why I put Trey Lance over him. Zach didn't go into 2022 with the equivalent of what Trevor Lawrence had in his rookie year. But back to Trey, and the only game we saw him play start to finish was the monsoon game against the Bears, if you guys recall, all the way back in week 1, and I don't hold that game against him for not having great numbers because of how bad the weather was in that game. There was 29 points scored between the teams as the Bears won 19-10, and a player we will discuss later in today's video in Justin Fields completed just 8 passes in this game. With how much of a dual threat Trey Lance was at North Dakota State, and how much defenses have to focus on not only the threat of him running the football, but also having to stop Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and last but certainly not least in Brandon Ayuk, just do not lose this team games and do not play awful, and the 49ers will go to the playoffs year after year. Whether this trade was worth it or not, with 3 first-round picks given up, or 2 first-round picks and a pick swap for that crowd, will take a while to determine, but for now, Lance would be the 4th quarterback taken in a 2021 redraft. Mac Jones would be the 3rd quarterback selected from this class, and Mac had a very good rookie season as he finished the year with 22 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. There were times he was making throws that veterans make, and the future looked very bright for him and the Patriots. Unfortunately, 2022 has been a little different of a story, and Mac has been up and down. Personally, I am under the belief he is in a lot of ways being set up for failure, with Matt Patricia as an offensive coordinator, and that the Patriots are doing nothing to maximize what he can do. And to further this idea or train of thought, I said this in the Week 13 recap, but it stands. The Patriots' best offensive weapon outside of Ramondre Stevenson in their game against the Bills was a rookie defensive back in Marcus Jones. Their leading receivers are Jacoby Myers, Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, and Tyquan Thornton, and this is not an ideal receiving core for Mac Jones, for Patrick Mahomes, or for anybody. It's not the worst receiving core in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination, but the Patriots need to do more for Mac than what they are currently doing. Mac over Zach Wilson and Trey Lance should not be too surprising, due in large part to how bad Wilson has been and not knowing what we have in Trey Lance. There is definitely a crowd out there that would say, we can reasonably guess what Mac Jones' potential would be, and guess that he will probably never be a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the NFL, and they would probably be right. They would then use this and say, because of this, we will take the unknown in Lance over Mac Jones for the foreseeable future. I can understand why people would choose Lance in a redraft, but I think there are a ton of things to like about Mac Jones, most notably his accuracy. The biggest thing to remember with Mac, and not just for Mac, but with every quarterback prospect moving forward, they can be a successful NFL player and not have to be a Mahomes, Allen, or Burrow. And I think Mac is a perfect example of a player who is solid and a player whose potential is not being maximized at the moment. And we have him going 3rd in this redraft. Justin Fields would be the 2nd quarterback in this redraft, and the common theme from this class, less than 2 years in, is not just for Fields, but for Mac and Trevor as well. Get these guys weapons that they can build around for the next few years. Saying this player or that player will be there for a decade is thrown around far too often, but you can reasonably assume each of these 3 quarterbacks will be starting for their teams for at least a couple of years. Justin Fields has shown a lot more in his 2nd season than what he did in his rookie season, and that is due in large part to opening the offense up and letting a playmaker make plays. And no disrespect to Darnell Mooney, who is unfortunately out for the rest of the season with an ankle injury at the moment, but I don't think Darnell is a number 1 receiver. Not to say he's a bad player when healthy, because he's not, but the Bears giving Justin Fields, Mooney, Chase Claypool, and Cole Kmet, and essentially saying figure this out, is not ideal for Justin. And credit goes to Fields, because for a lot of 2022, he has been making chicken salad out of not necessarily chicken shit, but for lack of better wording, just not chicken salad. And given Justin is a quarterback, the record is always going to be brought up, and it should not come as a surprise Fields has a horrible lifetime record because the team around him is not good. But I do believe Justin is a good quarterback, and for the first time in what seems like years for the Bears, they have an offensive weapon they can legitimately build around. In Fields' last 7 games, he has over 700 yards rushing and 7 rushing touchdowns, which would put him on pace for a 1,700-yard, 17 rushing touchdown season, while still throwing for 2,900 yards and 24 touchdowns. And the only not fun part about this class, and the future of this class for that matter, is this receiving free agency and upcoming draft is not the best, so we're not going to get a chance to see these guys with top tier receiving talent unless one of these teams makes a trade like the Bills did back in 2020 for a Stephon Diggs type player. I love Fields' talent and hope the success he has had so far in 2022 is sustained, because he is a bright spot on what is an otherwise not good football team in a rebuilding year. Fields has improved in pretty much every statistic from his rookie season, and granted he didn't start every game in 2021, you can see a night and day's difference in Fields from his rookie year to his second, and his ceiling is as high as the sky. And we have arrived to the number 1 pick in the 2021 redraft, and it is still Jags quarterback Trevor Lawrence. The biggest thing with Trevor entering year 2 was whether or not Urban Meyer did enough damage to potentially derail Trevor's career, and fortunately for all of us, he did not. From a coverage standpoint, there were times Trevor made rookie mistakes in 2021, like all rookies do. Early on, he was fooled by coverages as defenders would bait him, and a lot of the time, he would take the cheese. Perhaps nothing shows this better than him throwing 8 interceptions in the first 3 games of his career, and throwing just 9 interceptions over the remaining 14 games. Entering 2022, the biggest thing would be, can he control these turnovers, and can he improve with Doug Peterson as his coach, who is an offensive-minded coach, and a guy who was supposed to help Trevor's progression? And Lawrence has improved in a big way this year, as his interception percentage has dropped from throwing an INT on 2.8% of his passes to exactly half of that number, and now throwing an interception on just 1.4% of all passing attempts. Lawrence has a lower interception percentage than a lot of other premier players at the position, such as Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. The biggest thing for Trevor is eliminating mistakes, and he has for the most part in 2022. Sure, there's times where he makes bad plays, like everyone in the NFL does, but he fixes them, and as I record this, has just 2 interceptions since the middle of October, and both occurred in the same game, which was against the Denver Broncos. I don't fault him for having a bad game against the Broncos defense, as that is a Super Bowl caliber defense. But in the last few weeks, he has played good and was downright absurd in a comeback win over the Baltimore Ravens. He got hurt against the Lions, and I don't want to say that game doesn't count, because it does, but the whole team played bad and the Jags were trounced. Trevor currently has 17 passing touchdowns to 6 interceptions, with Christian Kirk as his number 1 receiver, and a signing that was heavily scrutinized this past offseason. He will be getting more help next year when Calvin Ridley comes back, and I can't wait to see how the Jags offense looks in 2023. But the current redraft order would go Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, Trey Lance, and Zach Wilson. And that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world. Until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.